Hello. So I've been asked to talk to you about the plan, Healthy, Sustainable Food Systems. And I'd like to take it in two parts, starting with the back half first. What do we mean by healthy, sustainable food systems? What do they look like? I'm with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, which is a strategic collaborative of over 20 foundations whose endowments total over $40 billion. The cornerstone of our collective work together has been trying to answer these very questions. My members work on issues and at scales that range from women's empowerment in West Africa to industrial supply chains out of South America to the genetics of plant breeding. Individually, they support their own unique missions, from health justice to addressing the root causes of climate change. But together, we aim to accelerate not just healthy, sustainable food systems, but healthy, equitable, resilient, culturally diverse food and agricultural systems worldwide. But to do so, we had to define those systems and create a common vision for what those systems would look like. So we came up with 6 principles. These systems have to be renewable so that the natural resources like soil, water, and air that we rely on and that have regenerated over millions of years continue to do so. They have to be resilient and durable to the massive changes taking place on our planet. They have to be equitable and just for all people in all places. They have to be diverse and value the rich heritage of species, practices, and traditions that have been passed down to us over the generations. They have to be healthy and foster true well-being for people, animals, the environment, and our societies. And they have to take into account interconnectedness. We really need to understand the interdependencies within these systems. We believe that these are the building blocks of healthy, sustainable food systems. These are the principles or the objectives of our collective future of food. And the objectives of the system are so critical. For instance, if we're after a system with the objective of net calorie availability delivered in the most efficient way possible, then we're going to create a certain kind of system. On the other hand, if we're after a system that feeds all people well and equitably through a diversity of channels without harming the planet, then we're going to create a very different kind of system. This radically alters what we mean by healthy, sustainable food systems and underscores the importance of defining the food systems that we want and need. Because if we change the system objectives, then we change the system. And at the Global Alliance, we believe that these should be our system objectives. So we change the system objectives, then what? This brings us to the first part of our session title, the plan. There's an urgency to having a plan, for sure. I won't reiterate the stats and figures that you've heard from others. Suffice it to say that our food systems are not delivering what we need them to deliver. We all know the problems. People are starving. People are increasingly dying of diet-related diseases. The planet is warming up. Farm workers have significantly increased rates of cancer due to toxic exposure. We're seeing food riots worldwide. I don't need to tell this crowd all the challenges we're up against. But despite the urgency and the severity of the problems, there is no one plan. There is not, nor will there be, any singular solution to the food and agricultural crisis that we face. And this is for 3 reasons. First, these systems are diverse. On the production side, we have subsistence farming, pastoralism, urban agriculture, industrial scale agriculture, localized agroecology, not to mention the diversity of processing, distribution, and consumption patterns around the planet. How food is grown, eaten, transformed, delivered, wasted across this planet differs immensely, so there can be no one-size-fits-all solution. Secondly, these systems are complex, perhaps one of the most complex systems we human beings have created, with inputs and outputs, governance and trade, regulations, subsidies, taxes and tariffs, global influences like migration, climate change, economic volatility. This, my friends, is a very complex system of systems. Finally, we're working with highly dynamic systems, which means that they are continuously changing over time, both as a system whole and as a set of interrelated parts. If you push on one part of the system, the whole thing will change. If you push on a different part of the system, different changes occur, many of them unpredictable. The well-known complexity theorist Donella Meadows argued, let's face it, the universe is messy. It's nonlinear, turbulent, and chaotic. It's dynamic. It spends time in transient behavior on its way to somewhere else, not in mathematically neat equilibrium. So we've got diverse, highly complex, dynamic food and agricultural systems. It's therefore likely impossible for us to come up with the plan. And some would argue it's not only impossible, but counterproductive as well. Jane Jacobs, the famous author of The Life and Death of American Cities, said big plans lead to big mistakes and stifle imagination and alternatives. We need only look at the Green Revolution, the big plan, to see that it didn't get us the outcomes that we were after. So, what do we need to do instead? I'm proposing 3 things. We need to assert visions of change, create frameworks for change, and engage agents of change, all with an eye to context and variable application depending on circumstances. This is, in essence, the Global Alliance's strategy. First, you assert visions of change. In other words, you change the objectives of the system. Second, you create frameworks for change. In other words, you create new ways of thinking about how to get to that system through models, exemplars, and protocols. Third, you engage agents of change. In other words, you create connections between all of those implicated in the food systems. Politicians, heads of companies, scientists, yes, and NGOs, farmers, eaters, foundations, students, civil society movements, all of them as active participants able to rework their part of the system. This isn't a plan so much as a roadmap. It suggests direction, and one knows their desired destination, the system goals and objectives, but there are multiple routes to get there, and you might need to change course depending on the weather, the time of day, traffic, cows in the streets, or farmers protesting on tractors, for instance. Let me give you a couple of examples from the Global Alliance's work. We have a number of priority initiatives, but I'm going to tell you about just 2. The first is Teabagri-Food. Teabagri-Food is a major study hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme and supported by the Norwegian government, the European Commission, and the Global Alliance. TEEB starts with the premise that we don't see all costs associated with our food, like the cost of soil erosion and diabetes, as an example. It then asserts a vision of food systems where all impacts and costs, or externalities, are made visible and accounted for. It then creates a framework for change that helps us understand how these costs and impacts can be measured, even if they can't be monetized. It's a new budget sheet of sorts that captures not just the costs we traditionally see, like labor, the cost of inputs and subsidies, but other equally important costs such as gender equity, recreation, antibiotic resistance, to name a few. And its aspiration is to engage agents of change, in this case, governments, businesses, and farms, to better inform their decision-making. It's not a plan, it's a roadmap. The application of Teabagri-Food framework will always be context-specific and will depend on where, why, and how it's being considered, whether on a livestock farm just outside of Stockholm or rice systems in Indonesia. The second priority at the Global Alliance I would like to tell you about is beacons of hope. Change is happening. Around the world, efforts to support food system reform are multiplying. We aim to document and demonstrate what those transitions look like and their positive benefits, to create a transitions framework that provides a model for how transitions can happen, with the intention to empower funders, advocates, policymakers, and others to accelerate progress towards the proliferation of these beacons of hope. Again, a roadmap, not a plan, that will allow us to envision where we want to go, to create a non-prescriptive framework on how to get there, and to empower agents of change to use it and adapt it based on context, situation, and need. Now, if there's a punchline to all of this, I would say it's ultimately about creating a new narrative. It's about telling ourselves and each other a different story about what we want our food systems to do for us and for others around the globe. Really, our work here is telling stories, all of us in this room. If you're a CEO, your company quite likely has a very well-honed story that is its DNA. If you write food policy, your policies are really nothing but stories. If you're an agricultural economist, GDP, budget sheets, economic models are all stories. They're all stories about what we value and what we don't, what we as a global community choose to pay attention to, and what we choose to ignore. we have a lot of plans. We're going to hear about many of them over the course of this session on how to change the food system. These two are stories. They're stories about the need to do everything from diversify supply chains to support national food policies. All stories on how to fix what many believe is a broken system. And I know that probably sounds simplistic, but I'd like to argue that it's really quite profound, because the truth about stories is that's all we are. The famous Nigerian storyteller Ben Okri argues that we live by stories, we also live in them. One way or another, we're living the stories planted in us earlier along the way, or we're also living the stories we planted, knowingly or unknowingly, in ourselves. The worst realities of our age are manufactured realities. The worst realities of our age are manufactured realities. So it's our task, therefore, as creative participants in the universe, to redream our world. So, finally, what I would like to end with is a question. The plan, healthy, sustainable food systems, it's our task to define what that means and to redream what it looks like and how to get there. Because as Ben Okri goes on to say, if we change the stories we live by, quite possibly we change our lives. Thank you. Thank you.